In this paper, I shall discuss some possible criteria of narrativity with regard to pictorial objects. I will argue that pictorial works, that is, static pictures, may express or imply narrative structures of various kinds. Further, I intend to focus upon the narrativeness of pictures, their tellability qua stories, that is, what makes them worth telling at all, or their noteworthiness, and its relation to narrativity in general. This paper will debate what narrative features might be more relevant than others as good-making qualities of pictorial storytelling as storytelling in general. And recent research within cognitive psychology and narratology, as well as some concrete pictorial examples, will be taken into account. And this will be the structure of this presentation. I will talk about what is narrativity in general, what is pictorial narrativity, and then I will focus upon tellability in pictorial storytelling. Now, the exact nature of what constitutes narratives has been and still is a matter of standing dispute within contemporary research. Quite frequently, narrativity has been regarded in a relatively descriptive, extensional and quite fixed sense, delineated from non-narrative texts by a set of defining criteria such as temporal sequentiality, emplotment, eventfulness, causality or causal agency, particularity rather than generality, and as Gerald Prince has claimed, a minimal requirement for something to be a narrative seems to be the representation of at least two real or fictive events or situations in a time sequence, neither of which presupposes or entails the other. Of course, most of you are acquainted with this what we can call a useful working definition. But quite obviously, this is not enough. Modes of discourse such as arguments, descriptions, expositions, or explanations may not properly be regarded as narratives due to the fact that they seem to be static, atemporal, and non-sequential. Still, the mere presence of a minimal narrative link does certainly not account for our sense of something to be a good or prototypical story. Thus, below, the water boiled, then World War II started, might from this perspective qualify as a minimal story, though hardly as a good, interesting, or even comprehensible one, most notably perhaps because several causal or enabling links between the two events seem to be missing. Generally speaking, many categories, at least psychologically speaking, usually do not have clear-cut boundaries, but rather seem to possess a graded structure. As to narratives, we may likewise conceive of them as constituting a category with fuzzy boundaries, centering around clear-cut, verbally expressed stories. Also in this case, it seems rather problematic to insist on a too rigid and essentialist view concerning this category's nature. Narratives, one could argue, may be intertwined with or at least include descriptions, expositions, arguments and explanations. Narratives may be manifested in various genres apart from verbal ones, and meaning bearers of various kinds may be more or less narrative. Narrativity should perhaps rather be seen as a matter of degree rather than kind. Some narratives seem to be more narrative than others. So some scholars have, apart from proposing more or less extensional definitions, also adhered to more scalar senses of narrativity, that is, degrees of narrativeness of narratives. Thus, already Prince has suggested that one should distinguish between narrativity in an extensional sense from intentional use. The first case, which he calls narrativehood, narrativity is characterized as some kind of object or entity defined as outlined before. In the second case, called narrativeness, or rather quality, a set of traits associated with narratives is intended. A frequently proposed strong candidate in that respect is the tellability of a story, what makes it worth telling at all, or its noteworthiness. Originating from analysis of conversational storytelling, for example by Labov, this concept has come to be applied to numerous other kinds of narratives. Presuppositions for or conceptually interrelated to the tellability of a narrative are especially features such as eventfulness, changes of state, the deviation of event or action sequences from pre-established expectations. Alternative notions such as suspense, curiosity and surprise, unusualness, switches and contrasts, violations of certain orders, political, social and moral ones, breaks with canonical scripts or schemas, sudden plot switches have been proposed by various narratologists to pin down the features which contribute to the tellability of stories. Apart from these features, it could also be argued that the emotional significance and the exemplary status of rendered events play a crucial role. Monika Fludernik, for example, has stressed the aspect of experientiality with regard to narrativity. Rather than focusing upon formal properties such as event structures or plots, Fludernik defined narratives as representations of possible words in a linguistic or visual medium involving acting, thinking, feeling, quote, protagonists of an anthropomorphic nature who are existentially anchored in a temporal and spatial sense and who mostly perform goal-directed actions, end of quote. And these representations are experienced as emotionally and experientially significant by recipients. The appeal to our prototypical existential interests and concerns are thus claimed to demarcate genuine narratives from simple narrative reports of event sequences. Indeed, many successful stories seem indeed to be concerned with more or less universal human preoccupations such as sex, danger, life and death, power, large amounts of money. According to a widespread anecdote, a French recipe for making stories more tellable ought to include ingredients such as religion, sex, aristocracy, and mystery. Consequently, a paradigmatic, condensed narrative with a high degree of tellability could then be something like this. "My God," said the Duchess, "I'm pregnant, who done it?" Now, is this a good story? Obviously not. Because it seems to lack sufficient semantic complexity in order to qualify as a satisfactory narrative. Complexity can be achieved by, for example, a high amount of involved agents, sceneries, events, changes of events, and so on. Moreover, as already mentioned, unexpected deviations from pre-established scripts or schemas seem also to be crucial in this respect, as well as the amount of ambiguities, interactions, multiple meanings, implications, or consequences. Although a narrative proceeds, as it actually does, it also includes or refers to so-called disnarrated elements, that is, alternative or virtual courses of action, what would have happened or could have done by an agent but did not, which add to the story's complexity with regard to its unrealized possibilities. Other disnarrated features could be an agent's false beliefs, calculations, or presuppositions, as well as the failure of goal-directed actions or intents. Now, we might ask why narratives exist at all. Why do we need narratives? And here is a list of some possible explanations. Narratives are fundamental means of organizing human experience, tools for constructing models of reality, instruments of individual collective self-creation, for example, sources of education and entertainment, of course, means for fostering empathy. So I think it seems hardly controversial, I believe, to claim that narratives frequently or perhaps even basically function as significant cognitive instruments for organizing and stabilizing our various experiences, creating coherence and intelligibility within the vicissitudes and complexities of our existence. And I will return to that later on. So now comes part 2. What is pictorial narrativity? This is actually a page from a Japanese comic book, which has a linear structure, but you begin here from right to left, like this, and something like that. So, This leads me to the next main issue of this presentation, namely if and in which way or ways pictorial media are more or less language independently capable of telling stories. Let us first note that although the study of literature has dominated narratological research, other visual resources such as film and television have of course been studied. And among art historians, the narrative aspects of visual art have of course constituted a prevalent focus of interest, though chiefly from a descriptive, interpretative and historical point of view. Still, attempts to elucidate the theoretical and cognitive fundaments of visual narrativity, especially in static pictures, have relatively scarcely occurred. There are some exceptions like Kafalenus and so on. This is the last point here which I would like to focus upon today. Now, at first glance, narratives are indeed primarily manifested by genuine temporal arts, such as poetry, drama, literature, and general motion pictures and the like, which by nature have a sequential structure. Pictures, on the other hand, are by nature static, only capable of representing timeless situations or single momentary instants. And accounts on these lines have already been put forward by 18th century scholars, most notably perhaps Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. Despite its perhaps initial plausibility, this view has also been criticized for a number of reasons, a discussion of which, however, would go beyond the scope of this presentation. In Lessing's case, we may note, though, that he actually admits that painting to some extent can reveal narrative structures. To be more exact, painting is capable of indicating actions, though only indirectly through suggestion, namely by preferably choosing the most pregnant, arrested movement in an imagined action sequence or story arc. The perception of actions in painting is thus not impossible per se, but it demands more effort. It is less convenient compared to poetry. Actually, the difference between painting and poetry is rather a matter of degree than a matter of kind. Poetry represents actions directly, painting only indirectly. And pictorial media seem indeed to lack narrative precision compared to verbal ones. Concerning the representation of internal states or motivations. In general, it seems pictorial media appear to require recipients which are more active in the reconstruction of narratives compared to verbal texts. Also, on the other hand, also literary works consist of ellipses, unstated facts or assumptions, causal relations, gaps, points of indeterminacy, and so on, which require mental acts on part of the reader, filling in or completing the perceived patterns. All texts consist of gaps and demand active efforts of meaning or coherence making. With regard to Western art, it seems unquestionably that numerous more or less clear-cut examples of pictorial storytelling can be found, at least as early as in ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages, as well as the Middle East and Asia, of course. First, we have numerous historical examples where static, monoscenic, and quite distinct pictures are linked in narrative series having a fixed reading order, frequently horizontal or vertical. Modern instances of this kind can be found in, for example, strip cartoons, but do actually occur as early as in antiquity and the Middle Ages. And we have here an example from the Hildesheim Cathedral, which shows Adam and Eve and the expulsion from Eden. God, this is the same series here, you read it top down and here bottom up. God presents Eve to Adam, and they eat the forbidden fruit, and they are discovered by God, and they are very ashamed, and they are expulsed from, this is the story here. And then we have so-called polyphase pictures, where various phases in an event series are represented simultaneously in the same pictorial space. And this is an example here, Masaccio. St. Peter has problems of getting tax money. So Jesus Christ gives him a suggestion where to get tax money, and this is scene number 2, where St. Peter finds money in a fish, in the mouth of a fish. And this is scene number 3, where St. Peter gives the tax money to the tax collector. And we have here the column of Trajan, where the emperor is shown in the same pictorial space here. Now, what about single pictures when an entire story has to be compressed into a single scene, sometimes called monophase pictures? We could, of course, adhere to Lessing's view, according to which pictorial narrativity in monophase pictures necessitates the representation of the significant frozen moment being part of a wider story structure. To which extent, however, does pictorial narrating presuppose the beholder's previous acquaintance with verbally communicated stories? In many cases, pictures are certainly parasitic on language-based stories, such as the famous Hellenistic sculpture group Laocoon and his 2 sons, which we see here, discussed as a paradigmatic example by Lessing himself. The pregnant moment rendered here consists of the death struggle between the priest Laocoon and his 2 sons with 2 snakes sent by Athena as punishment for his attempt to warn the Trojans from taking a wooden horse, having Greek warriors hidden inside, into the city. Thus a beholder acquainted with the relevant narrative background might very well see the sculpture as a significant or crucial moment within a narrative sequence stretching backwards in time as well as into the future, that is, where Laocoon and his sons die and the Trojans become defeated by the Greek. And this point can be further illustrated by a Maiolica dish from Urbino in Italy, which I saw in a nice museum in Toronto 1.5 years ago, which situates Laocoon and his sons in an elaborate, detailed narrative context, similar to the one that at least some contemporary viewers would have used to interpret the sculpture itself. But even without any knowledge of the Laocoon myth, most viewers would be inclined to interpret the scene as a life and death struggle filled with considerable despair between defensive humans and aggressive serpents. Drawing on the knowledge of humans' shared life world, interpreters would be able to reconstruct, let's say, hypothetical narrative structure from the assembled images. So, I will return now to some points made within cognitive psychology, where I've been very impressed by the work by Jerome Bruner and Roger Schenck, who claim that our knowledge to a considerable extent is organized around a large amount of stereotypic situations consisting of more or less routine activities. Intelligence consists basically of the storage and the retrieval of action in event structures, scripts. That is a set of expectations about what will happen next in a well-understood situation. It has also been claimed that the identity of cultures and subcultures is to a considerable extent based upon the sharing of such low and high-level narrative structures. Such culturally shared stories, and stories in general, occur frequently in highly abbreviated form, as skeleton stories, proverbs, or as gists. People often do not remember specific narrations of stories, but rather gists, which may be extended into full-fledged narratives. And as Schenck says, we have a database of partial stories rather than whole ones in our memory structures. Gists are structured sets of events that function as a single unit in memory that can be transformed by a variety of processes into actual stories. Now I will come to the last part, part 3. I would like to claim that pictorial material often functions in a similar way. They may have a more or less explicit or full-fledged narrative appearance or structure, but within a certain context, even highly condensed or indeterminate pictures may trigger the emergence of narrative interpretations on the part of the beholder. The production of visual works of art or pictures in general is influenced by the demands and needs of a certain public. The producer responds to these demands and offers opportunities for the beholder to apply his background experience of his way of life and his worldview assumptions, as well as his acquaintance with the artistic conventions. The beholder interprets a work of art according to such acquired category systems and habits which the work has been adapted to, and narrative gaps in the pictorial material are filled in, spontaneously filled in, I would say, with the necessary connecting details by the beholders. Implied worldviews of pictures may also have a confirming and reproductive, refreshing function with regard to the descriptive, explanatory, or evaluative power, and the very comprehensibility of pictorial objects presupposes at least some shared and common ground of belief systems. And the more or less intentional expression of worldviews in and by means of pictures can thus be said to participate in general social or cultural symbolic attempts to confirm or alter worldviews. I have an article which is in press for the journal Story Words, which is edited by David Herman, and the title of this article is Recreating Order, Narrativity and Implied Worldviews in Pictures. So this article will be published now in June. So if we are in more detail elaborate this aspect of implied worldviews in pictorial storytelling. Now I have to conclude soon. Well, many pictures and other visual artworks have been produced in order to modify, challenge, or even reject more or less established worldviews. Pictorial narratives can be instrumental in altering and adapting worldviews in light of the resulting states of disequilibrium due to external circumstances, whether epistemic, social, ideological, natural, climate changes, epidemics, or political, wars, invasions, outside sources of change. The more or less conscious or intentional expression of worldviews in and by means of pictures can thus be said to participate in general social or cultural symbolic attempts to confirm or alter worldviews. But the very comprehensibility of pictorial objects presupposes at least a partly shared belief system. Hence, speaking of humans' general psychological and social need for worldviews, pictorial narratives may provide us with a sense of life meaning, feelings of hope and trust, a long-term perspective on life's woes, and a sense of belonging to a larger whole. This was a quote, the last part by the philosopher Vidal, who's working in Brussels. Now, as the cognitive anthropologist Dan Sperber has argued, certain cultural products are more appealing than others and spread almost like epidemics because they resonate with the biological makeup of our brains and our innate dispositions. Those dispositions have evolved through millions of years of humans' interaction with our animate and inanimate environment. Most notably, we are mentally predisposed to be interested in other agents, whether human, animal, or supernatural. Because man is a social animal, our perception of the body language and facial expressions of other people and our ability to model the minds of others based on these clues have been all important for our survival and social life. And here I have, as you notice, some kind of evolutionary view. Many aspects of perception work relatively independently of language, having to do with our sense of balance, perception of color, and stimuli in general, which underpin our arousal and hormonal activation and strongly emotion-evoking episodes. It is in this respect, or in these respects, I believe that the tellability of pictorial narratives qua pictures may become further increased. And now I would like to have talked a little bit more about emotions and emotion theory, which I will not have the time to do. but I will mention some, discrepancies, deviations from our schemata create arousal changes and has an emotional impact. And this is a schema here from George Mander, where congruity seems to have a positive value, but deviations from our schemata, incongruity, may have more or either negative effects or slight forms of incongruity can be experienced as valuable, as interesting. We are interested in certain deviations from expectations. So I would claim humans seem to have a fundamental preference for moderate variation. While familiarity creates positive feelings, fostering the tendency to repetition and to the conservation of form and content, habituation also diminishes salience over time, lack of arousal and the lack of conscious attention. And this, of course, harmonizes with other accounts of tellability, breaks with canonical scripts or schemas, sudden plot switches, and so on. Let's see. Second, goal setting is one of the central elements in basic storytelling, not least concerning fundamental needs such as survival, protection, health, sexual reproduction, wealth, environmental control, and intrinsically the avoidance of pain, the maximizing of pleasure. As social animals, we, and not least as children, are utterly interested in interpersonal relationships and bonding. Our innate dispositions cue our liking for stories about the attachment between children and parents, about romantic relations between adults, fighting, aggression, bonding with brother in arms, as well as themes concerned with social exchange and morality in general. I believe this is a lot of what tellability in general and as to pictorial storytelling is about. And this is a very successful story. This is a very interesting story having to do with betrayal, with Judas is betraying Jesus. We have various scenes here with certain forms of deviations, stylistic, artistic deviations, which makes the tellability qua picture even, or increases the tellability qua picture. And this by Riemenschneider, which can be seen in Rothenburg in Germany. It's a relief in a lime tree. This must have been as 3D cinema for us today, for contemporary beholders at that time. And here Tintoretto with this strange perspective and this life. Well, as we are in Paris, I couldn't resist to take this example here, which we can see in the Louvre, Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatio, which depicts a crucial scene from a Roman legend about the dispute between two combatant cities, Rome and Alba Longa. Three brothers from a Roman family, the Horatii, agreed to end the war by fighting three brothers from an Alba Longa family, the Curatii. In the painting, the first ones, the Horatii, are shown saluting their father, who holds their swords out for them. The mother and sisters are shown to the right, with clear expressions of sorrow. Their despair is partly due to the fact that one sister, dressed in white, is engaged to one of the Curatii, who they are going to fight, and another dressed in blue, there I believe, is a sister of the Curatii, married to one of the Horatii, who you can see here. According to the legend, upon defeat of the Curatii, the remaining Horatius returns home to find his sister cursing Rome over the death of her fiancé. He kills her, horrified that Rome was being cursed. Now, to educated contemporary beholders, the significance of this psychologically charged theme was quite obvious, as well as its political implications, and the painting became an immediate success. The legend as such was well known to many citizens in Paris at the time, partly due to the revival of the play Horace by the 17th century dramatist Pierre Corneille, which directly seems to have inspired David himself. The painting was commissioned by Louis XVI, Louis XVI, as an allegory about loyalty to the state and therefore to the king. However, in pre-revolutionary France, the painting became increasingly interpreted as an expression of loyalty to the state in general, rather than the family and the church. A political hero has to forsake his private happiness and family ties in order to be able to sacrifice himself for the nation and the political cause. This is a tellable story, isn't it? At least it was experienced as such. And if you have time and go to the Louvre, please have a look. This is really amazing, among other things in the Louvre, of course. So, we will not have time about this unsuccessful romantic relation, but I would end by saying this. Pictures like these seem to express some of our most fundamental concerns, to touch upon viewers' existential interests, fears, and hopes, and thus provide narrative scaffolding for the fragility and vulnerability of human existence, thus making them tellable or noteworthy. They tell stories more or less explicitly about the world or some of its aspects, about possible or recommended ways of acting and interacting. And in Shank's terms, they function as narrative gifts that expanded by the beholder into more full-fledged stories, which, together with the many other forms of storytelling circulating in the culture, are inextricably entangled with our everyday conceptions of lived experience, making them worth telling. And that was this. Thank you very much.